Aimie Runyan, welcome back to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's great to be back.
It is always great to have you on. Is your middle name, nickname, should it be the Machine?
Yeah, it's been a lot of books lately. It's been a lot of books lately, like one every 6 months. And that's a lot for Trad Pub. That is a lot for Trad Pub. And I am slowing down a little bit. I have one book coming out in April of next year and nothing else slated for 2025. And despite being, an admitted workaholic, I am working on being fine with having one release. I have three this year. Because one of them's a co-authored book, but it still counts. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's been a lot. It's been a lot.
you care as much about a co-authored book, you put as much energy into it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, wow. Wow. So what if something else comes along that will add a title to next year? What if somebody pushes you, a publisher says, we need something by X?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you don't say no in publishing. I mean, you really don't. Let's be honest. If I got a book deal and somebody wanted a manuscript for late 2025, I'd probably get on it. But I think that that's pretty, I think right now most traditional publishers are looking for 2026 and beyond. So we'll see. I mean, the name of the game in publishing is flexibility, to be sure. But I think that it's pretty safe to say, unless I do a self-published type project, which never count that out, it's going to be one book in 2025.
Yeah. How does that feel?
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
I'm really, the thing that's been hard, more so, I mean, the writing is intense, but it's the marketing. Literally, I had a book out 3 weeks ago, and I'm already working on blurbs and getting ready for a cover reveal for my April book. And so, for somebody who, I mean, I wouldn't classify myself as a pure introvert, but it does take a lot of social battery and a lot of creative energy to be able to market the books. And so that's even in some ways, I think, harder than getting the words on a page. Because if you write 1 to 2,000 words a day without fail, you can write a couple of books a year. You really can. But it's the marketing I find to be somewhat draining.
Yeah. Well, you can write that if you produce 1,000 to 2,000 words a day, you can definitely do it. But that's writing. That better be productive writing time. It's not you. You better know what you're doing and what scene you're working with. And there's not too many days you can just say, well, that wasn't such a productive day. You've got to be on it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's true. And we all go through seasons. And I'm in kind of a, I guess that's a nice thing if you're doing one book a year or a book every 8 months or 10 months, is that you can take a little bit of a breather and you know what, I'm feeling the marketing edge today, because marketing can be fun. I don't want to discourage people from, because the marketing can be fun. You're engaging with other people, you're trying to make friends with influencers, you're on social media, crafting fun videos, and some days that feels a little bit more fun than sitting down and churning out words when a scene's not working. But the reality is that you're right, you can't have too many days when the muse doesn't speak to you, if you want to churn out, books on the regular, for sure. But we all do have seasons, and you've got to give yourself a break. You have to give yourself a break. And there are days when you say, I got 200 words in today, and that is way better than zero, and I'm going to
Yeah.
take it.
Yep.
Or if you write 1,000 words that are complete garbage and you're going to have to redo them, at least you got something on the page.
Yep. We're going to get to your new book, Mademoiselle Eiffel, in just a
Yeah.
second. But now that yeah, she holds up a copy,
Yeah.
ever marketing, very
Yeah. Always
smart.
marketing.
We're going to get to that in a second. But you actually raised a couple of interesting points here, When if I could just stay on this.
Mm-hmm.
One thing you kind of mentioned in there is blurbs. And one thing I wonder about is how often you can go back to the same people and how hard it is to expand your network of blurbers, because you don't want to keep going back to ask for that
Yeah,
same
exactly.
group. And then it's also difficult to kind of push out and find a bigger band.
I'm very fortunate in that I'm a member of the Tall Poppy Writers that I'm sure I've mentioned on the podcast before.
Yep.
And my agency, my agent is Kevin Lyon, and we have a little merry band of historical fiction authors called the Lionesses. And so we kind of have a built-in little group, and generally the answer, you're generally expected, if somebody asks you, if you can, to blurb whenever possible. And, the answer isn't always going to be yes, and that's fine. And, I've had, in the course of, I think I'm on book 11. I want to say I've had a few people do two at this point. So yes,
That's
of
pretty.
course. I mean, there's a finite number of authors out there. And the hard thing for me is that I try to ask 10 people in hopes of getting five. That's generally my goal. And if I feel like I really shot for the moon on the book that I'm working for, and I got some very nice, I really couldn't possibly, from a couple of big people, and some outside of the box people as well. And I just reach out. These are people I don't have any direct conversation connection with, and I just reach out to their communications people and ask them very nicely, like, is there any possible way you could fit this in their schedule? And the answer was no in a couple of cases, so I'll have to come up with a couple other names. But you always want at least one, pretty, heavyweight person to put on the cover. I was very fortunate for Mademoiselle Eiffel. I got Kristen Harmel and Janet Skeslin Charles. And ideally, I mean, in a lot of cases, like having two of those big blips and Chanel Clayton, I got a lot of big people for Mademoiselle Eiffel, which is fabulous. But it was sometimes nice to spread out the really big name people so that you can have those for the cover.
Yep.
But
Yep.
it's just it's also a question of who you think is going to be a great fit for the book, because you want overlapping readership. Kristen Harmel and Janet Skeslin Charles have both written extensively about Paris in particular, so Mademoiselle Eiffel was a very obvious choice.
Yep. I can't say I love asking for blurbs. It's not my
No.
favorite part of the business. And I don't think in reality it really sells books. It might one or two, 1%, 2% of the readers you've got might be moved, but
Mhm.
it's just part of the game. I don't think it'll ever
It
go
really
away.
is. It really is. And I will say that, I've had amazing blurbs, and I've had books where I didn't get that many blurbs or didn't put a lot of energy into it. And I don't think it does necessarily move the needle. But what does help is when those authors, say, I read this book for a cover quote and it was amazing. And they share it on their social media or they review it on
Right.
NetGalley. And that's where it does tend to have traction.
Yeah.
Because, somebody seeing Kristen Harmel or Kate Quinn's name on the cover of my book, they may not, say, well, they blurb how many books a year. That may not move them to buy it, but if one of Kate Quinn or Kristen Harmel or Janet Skeslin Charles, their faithful followers see a post that they make on social media recommending the book, that can definitely move the needle a little bit. As much as anything we can will move the needle, you know.
Yep. Well, um, it's sort of one of those aspects of, especially
Yeah.
with your pace, you're constantly out there asking for that community to help you. And I'm absolutely positive you return the
Oh,
favor when
absolutely.
asked.
And I
Yeah.
love it. I have to say, I love it. There have been times when I've gone after authors and saying, I'm blurbing this book, whether you like it or not. Tell your people to get me a copy. Because I'm excited about it, because I'm a reader first and foremost. But it's kind of like getting homework, and it encourages me to read in my genre when I'm exhausted by research reading. And
Right.
so it keeps me on game. And I am a big audiobook person, and it keeps me reading in print because often I can't blurb from audio. They don't have it ready until
Right.
pretty close to launch.
Right.
Though I should say, if you ever have the audio files ready, I'll take those too.
Yeah.
But
Me
that's
too.
you can read a lot faster sometimes than you can listen to an audiobook.
Yeah. Yep. Very good. Well, let's get to the new one.
Yeah.
Let's talk. I think the title is sort of indicative of what the topic is.
Yeah.
And that cover probably provides another clue. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Mademoiselle Eiffel, yes. And
Yeah.
this is the story of Gustave Eiffel's oldest daughter, Claire, who is kind of an unknown figure in history, but who is really significant in her father's career and ultimately the building of the Eiffel Tower, which was kind of his crowning glory.
Yeah. Wow. And so it's all from her perspective?
Yep, it's a one POV, all from her perspective. I haven't done that in a while. Well, I guess Lavender and Sage was one perspective too. But a lot of my historicals are multiple POV. But Claire, she was the clear heroine from day one. And I talked a bit to my agent because I was inspired to write something set in the Belle Epoque because of A Bakery in Paris, which was set just before the Belle Epoque, at least half of it. For those of you who don't know, it's a split timeline, 1870/71 and post World War II. And it's showing Paris in its lowest moments, rebuilding itself. And it's amazing to me that, in 1870, Paris was in ashes practically. And by 1889, they were celebrating the World's Fair in all their glory. The Eiffel Tower was built, and it was the zenith of French cultural influence over the whole world. And the fact that they rebounded so well and so quickly, and really without a monarchy for the first time, I want to write something set in that period. I have to. And I thought about doing a split timeline with Claire and like a dancer from the Moulin Rouge or something to show the upper class, the lower class. But my editor, Tessa Woodward at William Morrow, said, no, Claire's enough on her own. I think that, and of course, there's a logical problem of how would this can-can dancer and the daughter of a grande bourgeoisie, bourgeois, get to meet each other. And I do sneak in some Moulin Rouge stuff, but it really, because I love the fact that the Eiffel Tower and the Moulin Rouge were being built at the same time. But we decided that Claire was enough on her own, and my editor was really right that there was so much grist for Claire's character to be able to develop her in 100,000 words that I really didn't need the second timeline, or I would have felt like I was cheating both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what role does she play in terms of her father's career? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
And maybe give us a couple of, paragraphs too on the father. Was he really well known before he got the Eiffel Tower job, or what
Yeah,
was his
so
story?
so Gustave Eiffel was an up and coming architect when the story opens. Like he was well respected. He was building stuff all over the place. He was building stuff in Portugal when the story opens, and he was really, he wasn't necessarily the first word in French architecture, but he was slated that way. And he was really, he was a first generation architect. His father was in, I can't remember, metalworks of some kind, so it wasn't a huge departure. But he went to the Polytechnique and studied architecture, and he was starting to get bigger and bigger jobs. And when our story opens in 1877, Claire's mother had, so Gustave Eiffel's wife had just passed away, and Claire was only 14. His poor wife was only 32,
Mm,
and she passed away from some kind of a lung complaint. I think it's probably tuberculosis, though it wasn't ever, expressly stated, because medical technology wasn't what it is now, and
right.
so Claire took over, as one might expect, the raising of her younger siblings. There were four of them that ranged from 13, so a year younger than her, to age 4, so very young, and then there was also the running of the household, and so she had to manage the household staff. They were wealthy enough; they had a pretty healthy staff. So it wasn't like she was scrubbing baseboards, but she had to command the respect of the household staff, so that they, because that was definitely not an easy feat. In that time for a young girl like her, she was only 14. But in addition to those rather expected duties, she became her father's advisor and right-hand woman. She just gained, raised more and more, and took on the roles that her mother had, traveled with him within 2 months of her mother's death to Portugal to help oversee the final days of the building of the Maria Pia Bridge. And he trusted her instincts and her intelligence, and really, she became rather influential in his business for the rest of his life. For the rest of his life. They lived
Wow.
together for
Wow.
the rest of his life.
Wow. And
Yeah.
when it came time for the Eiffel Tower itself, was that something that he was eager to do? Was that how did that all come
Oh,
about?
it was definitely a key prize, and he definitely
Okay.
was playing politics to get his name. He did not design the Eiffel Tower. There were two wonderful architects who designed it, but he was the finance, he was the brains behind it, he was the politicker behind it, and it was definitely a feather in the cap for any architect, and he fought mercilessly to get it. And it was very controversial. I mean, it's a 300-meter tower. People were worried for very good reasons. Is it going to be dangerous? This massive structure going up in a residential area of Paris. They're
Yeah.
worried about the dangers of construction and not just the inconvenience, but the danger of construction. And then, of course, there were other more ridiculous worries, like, is it going to change the weather patterns in Paris? And so of course it serves as a lightning rod for Paris, but they managed to channel that and make it as safe as they can because every city has to have a high point. So controlling it is really the safest option. And that was, the arguments they had to make. But they were fielding, and there was a list of 300 prominent people in Paris who were keen on stopping the project, including notably Garnier, the architect of the famous Paris Opera House, who worked with Gustave Eiffel on the observatory in Nice that was, a blend of classical architecture from Garnier and modern technology for the moving dome from Eiffel. And he signed the list of people that were not in favor of the Eiffel Tower, and it really felt like a betrayal. But I
Yeah.
think they did manage to patch things up, thankfully.
Yeah. So when you talk about stories and fiction, a lot of writers were all told you need an arc. You need the main character needs to begin in one place and end in another.
Mm-hmm.
How do you develop an arc for a novel about a real life character, and adhere somewhat to the facts? Is that something that you, Aimie Runyan, thinks about as you approach a novel, knowing that you've got to come up with a way that she's going to be transformed?
Yeah, it's true to say that the telling of a life story does not a novel make, and that's absolutely true. This one really felt obvious to me. It starts with her taking on the responsibility for the household. So it starts at her mother's funeral. Sorry for the spoiler. And there's family tension there. And then it moves toward her really becoming, the accepted mother hen of the family and taking on more and more responsibility. But then that position in the family becomes challenged when this young genius architect comes onto the scene and starts, taking away some of her father's attention because her brothers are not really capable of taking over the family business for various reasons. The fact that the younger is very young, the older is simply not interested. And so, Gustav is looking for an heir apparent, and it can't be Claire. And so there's tension there. And then, of course, the big sort of climax moment is the building of the Eiffel Tower. And that, I actually skipped ahead to write those chapters so I wouldn't feel rushed. I wouldn't feel like, I was just trying to cram it all in. Those had to be the chapters that really sparkled. And so I got the beginning situated and then I jumped ahead to the Eiffel Tower. And then, of course, the denouement is, Gustav's fall from grace and him sliding into retirement and Claire discovering, or deciding what she wants to make of her life now that but the demands of her father's life are becoming less and less. And so that was the natural progression for me in my head. And it really didn't vary from that. But, after reading about Gustav's life, because I really had to extrapolate a lot about who Claire was from what was written about her father. Because there isn't a lot written about her, except in the archives and her own letters, which were, really, in the period of the Eiffel Tower itself, not plentiful because she and her father were, they were together during those points in time. They didn't have need to write letters, as you might expect. So it really was a lot of extrapolation, but I really could envision how, what were the trunks, the portions of her life that really needed to be focused on in the novel.
So how old is she at the end of the book then? Do you start at 14?
Yeah, she is okay. So, if we're not including the epilogue when she's in her 60s, she
Oh,
is in her mid 30s at the end of the book.
okay. Yeah. Wow. I don't know how in the world any writer will skip ahead and write something out of sequence. That would just be about the most difficult, painful thing I could imagine to. I don't know
Yeah,
how you do that.
well, I'm a big Scrivener fan, and so I can visualize it. My ADHD brain can see, I had everything mapped out, and so I could see it. The hard part is really when you have a romantic relationship and you have to make sure that because she gets married right before the Eiffel Tower really starts getting built, and she's expecting her first child by that point. So like making sure that their relationship matches up with where its arc should be seems to be something that is important to to keep an eye on. But I knew that they were married, and that they were, because it really is follows sort of a marriage of convenience, almost an enemies to lovers sort of trajectory. But I mean, it's certainly not the focus of the book, but you really have to be faithful that you don't have them fighting and then happy, and then it has to have an internal logic to it. And that was something. The other book I wrote out of order was Girls on the Line, and I would just jump to whatever chapter I was excited to write, and it made editing that book extremely hard, because I felt like with the two love interests in that one, it's like it's not matching up. The arc isn't doing what it should, it's doing this. And
Hmm.
so that one took a lot of editing, but I've written quite a few books since book number 4. Yeah, that was book 5. Yeah, 4. And so it was, I had a better handle on how to manage writing out of sequence, which isn't my
Well,
preference, but sometimes it works.
yeah, I think that's a skill and an art all of its own. So, I don't think that's something you can teach. Maybe you can, but I don't know.
No, it's
That
something that I
blows
think it
my
takes a
mind.
few books. It takes a few
Yeah,
books to be able to really
yeah,
figure that. And some books lend itself better than others. But I took that lesson actually from the School for German Brides, because I felt like I really didn't spend enough time at the bride school, and that's like the biggest critique that most people have. I love the book. And I'm really happy, and I felt like there had to be a lot of buildup, but there was so much of the bride school that it only takes place in a few chapters. And so if I'd started there, it might have been easier to go back and reverse engineer our way back to the front.
yeah,
But it is what it is. But you try to take those lessons from previous books and apply them to future books and decide
yeah,
whether or not it worked. In this case, I
yeah,
do think it worked.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure it does. One thing that just intrigues me somebody who writes historical fiction, I'm wondering, there must be part of your brain that must say, I'm writing historical fiction, but another part of your writer brain better be really focused on the fact that this is when you're writing a scene, this is the now of the time. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to be really invested in the now of the time. It has to be completely three-dimensional. And maybe I'm saying something that's so obvious, but sometimes I'll pick up an historical novel and I'll feel like my hand is being held on a trip through a time tunnel, and I'm being, coached and instructed and being led down the path and then told about all the various things of the culture of the time and the habits of the people and the economy and the it just feels like I'm being kind of led by a tour guide as opposed to being immersed in the now of the story.
Okay, so you used the key word there, which was tell. You're being told about the cultural mores rather than being shown. And the key there is seen. And yes, those are those little details about, whether or not, like I take a scene where they go to buy a corset. It's one of my favorite scenes in the whole book. Her grandmother takes her to be fitted for a corset. And there was a new corset shop that was experimenting in more flexible materials that would still maintain your shape, but allow for more freedom of movement. And it was, of course, controversial to her grandmother, who was very old fashioned, who thought that it should be whalebone and steel and nothing else. But it was you have to, take people on a journey by showing them, not by, by just, blindly, explaining all these little details to them. But those little details matter so much. But it's the art of weaving them in a way that feels organic.
Yep. All right, let's get to the really important question. How high up have you been on the Eiffel Tower?
Oh, to the very top. And in fact, I got to go. I went back to do research for this book twice in Paris. So
Darn it.
rough.
Oh,
I
I
know.
hate when that happens. I'm
I
so
know. So rough. I went
sorry.
to Paris twice.
Oh,
I
oh,
know. My heart bleeds for myself. And
yeah.
no, well, the first trip we were on a big road trip for basically our delayed honeymoon in 2022. And I can't remember. I was thinking about this last night. Like, I don't know if Mademoiselle Eiffel, like the contract had been signed, or if it had basically just been, a pretty um, enthusiastic green light at that point, or if the contracts were in the works. But I got one day at the archives in the Musée d'Orsay and the Eiffel family archives to basically rifle through all their papers and take pictures with my phone and take it all back. And then I used that to write the first draft. And I got to go back in the following spring for a week by myself. So I wasn't like on a time tour, a timetable with anybody else. And I got to spend 3 days in the archives filling the gaps. So, I had a list of questions I needed to answer, and I got to go to the National Library and to visit some of the places that where Claire lived. I went to the top of the Eiffel Tower. Took some doing actually, because it's still timed entry like we have at the Rocky Mountain National Park. They have timed entry and limited entry to the top of the Eiffel Tower, which is absolutely a godsend given how packed it gets up there. But anyway, so those measures are still in place, and I had to do some finagling and get myself on a tour. Even though I didn't care about going on a tour, I got to go on one so that I could get entry to the top of the Eiffel Tower. And I spent a few hours up there at the tippy top, and there is Gustav's apartment up at the top. And it is, there's a likeness of him and Thomas Edison in wax, and they're sitting back, their legs, very kind of casually crossed, like they're talking about light bulbs or what have you. And Claire is there standing behind them, in this lovely burgundy two-piece ensemble and looking like she's ready to serve coffee. And it's like, you can imagine what the little plaque says. It's like, our creator, Gustave Eiffel, and the great Thomas Edison with his daughter, and also Gustave's daughter, Claire, was there, just as a matter of fact. But that shows how important she was, but her story had never really been told in any detail. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, the Eiffel Tower is just, I mean, first of all, you can't really imagine Paris without it, of course, right? I
No.
mean, it's amazing. In some ways, it's sort of a weird looking thing by itself,
Mm-hmm.
but it is just, I mean, Paris is full of cool stuff like that, but again, the Eiffel Tower is just
It's iconic.
iconic,
Yeah.
and yet iconic almost is an understatement. I mean, in
Mm-hmm.
some
I mean,
ways.
it's the icon that you use to define iconic. My
Yeah,
husband,
yeah.
my husband's a historian, and we were having this conversation. Like, can you name a building that is, or a structure that is more iconic? And one of the other ones that came up was the Statue of Liberty, which Gustave Eiffel built the inner workings of that too.
Yeah.
And so, he had his hand on a couple of monuments that are probably make the top five. But even the Great Wall of China, things like that, it's not quite the
Big,
same.
Big Ben, yeah.
Yeah, Big Ben, that's another one. But you think about, when they do like montages of some kind of a world problem in a movie, and like an alien invasion or what have you, when they're showing Europe, they're always show the Eiffel Tower. And
Yeah, yeah.
every movie that has to do with France, they pan briefly, even if they're going to the French countryside. It's like they do this little montage where they fly into Paris, show the Eiffel Tower, and then get on a train to other parts. And it's just a visual cue for everybody around the world, especially the Western world, but I mean, really the world over, that says, this is France. This is
Yeah.
France. And that was funny with the cover is that, so many historical fiction covers where it has anything to do with France have the Eiffel Tower on it. And I
You
said,
bet.
we have to Eiffel Tower all of them. And I even suggested
Yeah.
do a black cover with a red Eiffel Tower. Bam. But they wanted to have Claire on the cover, given that the title is Mademoiselle Eiffel. So
Yeah. I wonder what he would have thought of having beach volleyball in the Olympics at the base of the Eiffel
I
Tower this
think
summer.
that Gustav and Claire would have thought it was fabulous. Once they
Yeah.
got past, the scanty uniforms that would have scandalized them, they would have been like, this is amazing. This is what it was built for. It was really built to be a showpiece. And, the Olympics is really kind of, the epitome of that, using it as the original intent,
Yeah.
and for
That
its
was
original
really a
intent. Yeah, welcoming
terrific.
the world to Paris.
Yep. Yep. Wow. Such an interesting story.
Mhm.
And congratulations on
Well,
book
thank you.
number, you said 11?
11, I want to say it's 11.
Yeah.
I've kind of lost track, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's 11. It's like my eighth historical, um, ninth, but then it's 11th if we count the co-authored ones, and yeah, I think so. Maybe 10, but we're
Yeah.
getting up there. We're getting up there.
Yes,
So
we are. That's great.
yeah.
Very good. Well, thanks for the rundown, Aimie. As we wrap up, we always like to pay it forward, recommend another book or writer, somebody you think people should be paying attention to.
Oh, absolutely. So I have been listening to John Eyre by Mimi Matthews. This is not a super recent release. I think it's like 2021 or 22.
Sure.
And it's a gender swapped retelling of Jane Eyre. And it's fabulous and it's gothic and creepy. And I'm pretty sure that there's vampires, but we don't know yet. And it's fabulous and I love it. So yeah, Mimi Matthews is absolutely fabulous. And gosh, who else have I listened to recently? Because I am a big audio person. I have a lot of driving to do. Um, oh, the last really fabulous one, Maddie Dawson, and Let's Pretend This Will Work, was a lovely little rom-com. Women's fiction rom-com, kind of comedy of errors. And it was delightful and very poignant, despite the very simple story, but very poignant.
Great. Aimie Runyan, thank you so much. Good luck with maybe a calmer 2025, but continued success to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me, Mark. I appreciate it.